A police dog stops dead in his tracks near a bag no one was paying attention to. Minutes later, alarms were blaring, and what was hidden inside, it changed the way security looks at everything. But hold on. Before we roll the full story, drop your favorite dog's name in the comments. And if you love stories where animals outsmart danger, hit that subscribe button, because the next one might just leave you speechless. The sun had barely crept over the skyline of Chicago when the first commuters began to trickle into Union Central Station. A mist still hung low over the elevated tracks, casting long shadows across the concrete as the city stirred awake. It was Monday, always the busiest day, and within an hour the terminal would be swarming with travelers. But in those early minutes, there was only the rhythmic screech of arriving trains and the occasional murmur of cleaning staff prepping the platforms. Sergeant Noah Griggs adjusted the collar of his uniform and rubbed his gloved hands together against the morning chill. He had been part of the K-9 Transit Division for nearly a decade, and he knew the layout of the massive station better than his own apartment. But today, something felt off. Not in the air, not in the people, in Titan. Titan, a 4-year-old Belgian Malinois, was his partner and closest companion since the day they'd been paired at the Homeland Security K-9 trials. The dog had a sharp edge to him, calculated, calm, unnervingly intelligent, but this morning he was unsettled. It began as a subtle tension in the leash, then a stillness in his gait. Titan wasn't sniffing at random or marking territory. He was focused, intent. Griggs noticed the shift as they patrolled the west entrance near Track 9B. The station was mostly quiet, the sound of luggage wheels rolling against marble and the occasional crackle of the intercom echoing down the wide concourse. The polished floors reflected the glow from high industrial lights overhead. Titan's ears pinned forward and his stride changed. The leash tightened ever so slightly. "What is it?" Griggs murmured. Titan didn't answer. He didn't need to. The sudden stiffness in his posture spoke louder than any bark. They approached a row of plastic seating next to a vending machine alcove, still deserted from the night before, and there, under the middle bench, barely visible to a casual glance, sat a duffel bag. Black, scuffed, unmarked, unattended. Griggs squinted. The location wasn't random. It was tucked just enough to go unnoticed but still near a high-traffic exit. Protocol snapped into place in Griggs's mind. He gave the leash a quick signal. "Secure," he whispered. Titan sat immediately, eyes fixed on the bag, his body rigid. But what followed was not standard. Instead of the trained passive alert, an upright sit, unmoving, Titan emitted a low, guttural growl. His tail was stiff, nostrils flaring. Then, without warning, 3 sharp barks tore through the quiet terminal. Griggs froze. This wasn't normal. Titan didn't bark on alerts. He was trained to signal passively for explosives. For narcotics, he'd scratch or paw. But this was something else. He reached for his radio. "Dispatch. This is Unit K-94. I have an untagged bag at Union Central Station, west entrance near Track 9B. Col 9 is signaling abnormal alert, requesting bomb squad and immediate lockdown of adjacent sectors." The dispatcher's voice crackled back with calm urgency. "Copy that, K-94. Units en route. Begin preliminary perimeter. Advise when backup arrives." Griggs took 2 steps backward and raised his voice, steady but firm. "Attention, travelers. This area is now restricted. Please move toward the central lobby immediately. Assistance will be provided." A few people glanced over from across the terminal, confused but compliant. Most had seen enough news stories to know what this might mean. Griggs kept his hand on Titan's leash. The dog hadn't moved. He was still staring at the bag like it was alive. Moments later, the first of the uniformed response team arrived. Officer Clara Nguyen and Sergeant Davis from Terminal Control. They flanked the entrance, redirecting traffic as the incident protocol unfolded. "Talk to me," Davis said under his breath. "Titan's reacting to something, but it's not consistent with any of his trained alerts," Griggs replied. "He won't approach, just growls and barks." "Could be a trick," Clara added. "Diversion? Maybe," Griggs said. "But look at him." They did. Titan's eyes hadn't left the bag. His posture was on edge, yet somehow cautious, like he wasn't just alerting to a threat, but warning of something specific, something nuanced, something dangerous in a way they hadn't been trained for. The bomb squad arrived 10 minutes later. Specialist James Kalin, head of explosive ordnance at the Transit Authority, nodded briskly at Griggs. "Same behavior as before?" "Yes, and he's not budging. Let's scan it." They deployed a small wheeled rover, its cameras and sensors humming softly as it rolled toward the bag. Titan shifted slightly as it approached but did not intervene. The screen showed a fuzzy image, clothing, a book, some toiletries. Callan furrowed his brow. No heat signature, no conventional devices, no tripwires. But he adjusted the zoom. "There's an unusual lining in the base. Looks reinforced." "False bottom?" Griggs asked. "Possibly, but not amateur work. This is subtle, professional." Suddenly, one of the response techs stepped forward. "Sir, I ran a quick swipe of ambient particles in the area. There's a trace of synthetic compound near the bench legs. Low concentration." "What kind of compound?" Kalin asked. "Not standard explosives. Something with bioorganic markers, might be residue from industrial adhesives. Or something we don't have on file yet." Callan finished grimly. Griggs felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. It was then that an unfamiliar voice cut in from behind them. "I'd recommend you don't open that bag." They turned to see a man in a dark gray overcoat, flashing an ID from the Department of Homeland Security. His name tag read, Agent Mark Hensley. "What do you know?" Callan asked sharply. "We've been tracking patterns involving false bottom bags showing up at major transit centers. Most were empty, decoys. But 2 of them contained fragments of military-grade dispersal equipment." "You're saying it's coordinated?" Davis asked. Hensley nodded. "And the targets seem to be transportation centers with international connectivity, places where a disruption causes ripple effects." "And the dogs?" Griggs asked. "Do they always react like this?" "Not all," Hensley admitted. "But we've seen reports handlers saying their K9s behave unusually, growling, refusing to approach. Some even whined or circled instead of alerting." Griggs exchanged a glance with Titan, who remained stone still. "Can you identify the compound?" Kalin asked. "Working on it," Hensley said. "But what we know is this: it's synthetic, bioreactive, and when activated in enclosed public spaces, it can trigger mass panic and severe respiratory reactions. Not lethal, but dangerous. And perfect for someone trying to create chaos without getting caught." "Non-lethal terror," Clara whispered. "Exactly," Hensley confirmed. Just then, a station manager ran up, short of breath. "We've got another problem." Surveillance pulled footage. The man who placed that bag, he didn't leave the station. Griggs's heart skipped. Timestamp: about 38 minutes ago. Where was he last seen? Platform level C, near the lockers. Cameras show him walking, no ticket in hand. "He's still here," Griggs muttered. Davis nodded. "If this is coordinated, that bag is part of something bigger. He could be watching us, or waiting. We need eyes on every level," Kalin snapped. "I can help," Griggs offered. "Titan may still have his scent from the bag. If he's reacting this strongly to what's inside, he might track the man who touched it." Agent Hensley looked skeptical. "Risky if the subject is armed. We'll be careful," Griggs said. "But if there's even a chance Titan can find him, we need to act fast." Permission was granted. Griggs knelt beside Titan, pulling a sterile evidence bag from his kit, holding it up near the duffel but without touching it. "Smell," he commanded gently. Titan sniffed, recoiling only slightly. Then he looked at Griggs, alert, eyes narrowed. "Track." Titan moved instantly, his body low and focused, nose close to the tiles. Griggs followed, radio in hand, heart hammering. They moved through corridor after corridor, passing ticket booths and newspaper stands. Titan paused briefly at an elevator shaft, then turned sharply toward the old platform tunnels, part of the original infrastructure now used mainly for maintenance. It was darker there, narrower, fewer cameras, perfect for hiding. Titan growled again, deep, purposeful. Griggs slowed. The air had changed, less filtered, more damp. The sound of their boots echoed off the stone walls. They were nearing something. A door stood slightly ajar up ahead, the sign above it barely legible, emergency storage, maintenance only. Titan stopped in front of it, tail rigid. A sound escaped him, a soft whine, not fear, not hesitation. A signal. Griggs gripped the radio. "This is K94. We have a location. Sublevel access near Platform C. Emergency storage room. Request immediate tactical backup." "Copy that, K94. Units en route." Griggs stared into the darkness beyond the door. He didn't need to be told that what lay ahead would shift the trajectory of the day, of many lives. Titan's reaction wasn't standard. It wasn't even trainable. It was instinct honed by experience, by partnership, something unspoken, something understood, and whatever was in that room, Titan already knew. The air inside the emergency storage room was damp and stale, thick with the scent of oil, concrete, and rusted metal. The fluorescent bulb flickered overhead, casting sporadic pulses of white light across the cluttered interior. Old train components, broken seats, discarded signage, and metal crates were stacked high and uneven along the walls. At first glance, it looked like a forgotten storage unit, but Titan's stance said otherwise. Sergeant Noah Griggs kept low, his hand steady on the leash. The Belgian Malinois was frozen in place, ears forward, nostrils twitching. Titan didn't bark. He didn't whine. But his body language made one thing unmistakable. They weren't alone. Backup was still 2 minutes out, but Griggs couldn't wait. He slid the door open slowly, inch by inch, letting Titan guide him. The dog stepped forward, silent and cautious, weaving between the crates. Griggs' flashlight beam swept across the narrow aisle, then it landed on a shadow that wasn't a crate. A man, half hidden behind a stack of metal drums, crouching, watching. Griggs stopped cold. The man didn't move. Titan let out a single low growl, his body lowering, preparing to spring. But Griggs raised a hand. Not yet. The suspect appeared to be in his mid-30s. Close-cropped hair, slim build, a dull green jacket stained with something dark around the cuffs. He had a satchel across his chest and something in his right hand, a black object, boxy, with wires. "Do not move," Griggs said evenly, voice firm but low. "Put the device on the floor, slowly." The man didn't flinch, but his eyes flicked, once toward Titan, once toward the back wall, and then he ran. He lunged left, ducking behind a stack of crates and sprinting toward the rear exit. Griggs gave a sharp command. "Titan, stop!" In a flash, the dog launched forward, bounding across the room with coiled speed and focus. There was no barking, no warning, just power. Griggs moved behind him, weaving through the crates, as Titan reached the man and lunged at his legs. The suspect stumbled, arms flailing as he hit the ground hard, the object in his hand skidding across the floor. but he fought. From his coat he pulled a small canister, silver, thin, with a pin. Gas! Griggs lunged forward just as the man yanked the pin loose. But before he could throw it, Titan bit down hard on his wrist, forcing him to drop the device. It rolled toward a corner and hissed faintly, releasing a light mist. Griggs dragged the man away from it, kicking the canister aside as Titan held the wrist. A second later, the door burst open and backup arrived, 2 tactical officers and Agent Hensley. "Get the device," Hensley shouted, pointing to the misting canister. The officers moved fast, securing it into a sealed containment box. Another officer pinned the man to the ground and zip-tied his hands behind his back. The suspect didn't struggle now. Instead, he began laughing, a dry, eerie chuckle that echoed through the chamber. "You're too late," he muttered. "That was only one." Hensley crouched. "One of what?" The man didn't respond. Instead, his eyes flicked to Titan, still on guard, breathing hard, chest rising and falling. "That dog," he said slowly, "is not supposed to know, not supposed to feel it." "He knew," Griggs replied flatly. "He always does." The interrogation room at Union Central was bare, just a steel table, 2 chairs, and a wall-mounted camera. The suspect, identified as Oliver Brandt, was a known fringe activist with suspected ties to several online extremist groups, though nothing on paper had ever led to an arrest. Until now, his fingerprints matched a prior flagged airport incident from 2 years ago, another suspicious bag found at a Florida terminal, later deemed a false alarm. But this wasn't a false alarm. The duffel bag they had isolated in the main concourse was opened only under hazmat containment. Inside was a network of synthetic fibers lining a hidden cavity. Embedded between the layers was an extremely fine dispersal mesh designed to release aerosolized agents when activated remotely. Not explosives, not narcotics. Something worse, aeroneuromimetic compounds. Artificial molecules designed to mimic symptoms of panic, nausea, dizziness, disorientation, and severe anxiety, all in a crowd. Non-lethal, but enough to incite chaos. And it had a timer, set to activate at exactly 8:47 a.m., 30 minutes after discovery. Griggs stood in the observation room, watching through the 2-way glass as Brandt sat silently, fingers twitching. "Is he talking yet?" Griggs asked. Agent Hensley shook his head. "Not much. Keeps muttering about phases and signal tests. We found a second bag." Griggs turned to him, stunned. "Where?" "North Terminal. Baggage lockers." "That one was locked." "Similar setup. We're trying to determine if there's more." Titan sat beside Griggs, panting softly. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes flicked toward the door every few seconds. "He knows there's more," Griggs muttered. "He's not at ease." "Not yet." As if on cue, Titan stood suddenly. He walked over to the glass and stared into the interrogation room. Brandt looked up. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither moved. Then Brandt flinched, a real, visible flinch. His smirk vanished. Griggs noticed. "He's afraid of him." "He should be," Hensley replied. That afternoon, a full sweep of the station was ordered. Dogs from 3 departments, hazmat techs, and DHS teams were deployed to every track, every locker, every corner of the underground structure. Titan led one of the groups through the south maintenance tunnels, rarely used and partially decommissioned. The air down there was heavy, stale. Even the lights buzzed weaker than the rest of the station. Griggs followed closely behind, Titan's nose low to the ground. Then the dog stopped. He circled, sniffed again, and sat. Not the intense alert posture from earlier, but something more familiar. A narcotics alert. Griggs crouched, checking the area. A maintenance locker stood slightly ajar. Inside, behind pipes and unused gear, was a soft black case. No ID. Inside, a smaller mesh dispersal pod still inactive. and a folded note. No words, just a symbol, a jagged line over a circle. They brought the bag to hazmat. By 6 p.m., 4 additional devices were found, all inactive, all similar. One had a timer already broken, failed wiring, but it wasn't the devices that chilled the investigators most. It was the network. Brandt hadn't acted alone. Security footage now under DHS review showed 3 different individuals interacting with lockers across the terminal within a 24-hour span, their faces partially obscured, identities still pending. The dispersal mechanism, it turned out, had 2 forms, timed and signal-based. One switch could trigger them all. Griggs sat in the locker room staring at the evidence table. "So close," he whispered. Titan lay beside him, eyes open, ears twitching even in rest. The dog's alert that morning hadn't just exposed a threat, it had unraveled an operation before it could evolve. "He changed the outcome of the day," Griggs murmured to himself, "of this whole place." He reached over and stroked Titan's fur, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. Still grounded, still ready. That night, Agent Hensley delivered an internal memo to the DHS regional office. Subject: Union Central Incident. Key 9 Anomaly Report. Key 9 Unit Titan. Handler Sergeant Griggs. Exhibited behavioral response inconsistent with current explosives narcotic training protocols. Initial bag contained compound undetectable by standard sensors, later classified as A&M class neurotriggers. Key 9 response predicted presence of agent prior to technical confirmation. Recommend initiate research partnership for sensory behavior profiling of K9 anomalies in urban threat environments. Note: without Titan's non-standard reaction, primary dispersal would have occurred during peak foot traffic. Potential injuries estimated 350 plus. As Griggs walked Titan to the edge of the station, the halls were quiet again. The morning chaos had been replaced with empty benches, flickering lights, and the soft shuffle of security personnel finishing their shifts. But something lingered in the air. Not fear, gratitude. Titan trotted beside him, ears forward, always watching. "Tomorrow they'll start asking questions," Griggs said aloud, mostly to himself, "about how you knew. About what else you can see that we don't." He glanced down. Titan looked back, as if answering the unspoken thought with silent certainty. "Because some things only dogs understand." 2 days had passed since the abandoned bag was found under the bench near Track 9B. 2 days since Titan's unshakable instinct had cracked open a plot that might have ended in chaos. The station was now under tight surveillance. Cameras had been upgraded, lockers sealed off, and the morning flow of commuters watched with fresh eyes by plainclothes security personnel and uniformed officers alike. But there was still one thing missing. The map, not a literal map, but the connection. The why behind it all. The devices were real. The intent had been confirmed. Yet the larger coordination, the wider web, remained elusive. Griggs sat alone in the department's evidence review office, a dimly lit room on the station's upper mezzanine. Titan lay near the radiator, eyes closed but ears alert. On the table were the 5 recovered dispersal devices, each now rendered inert. Alongside them, copies of the note found behind the second locker, a jagged line slashing through a circle. The same symbol had been found stitched into the lining of one of the bags. Not a brand, not a cult, something else, something organized. Griggs had been up all night reading between the lines, between the routes of the lockers, the proximity to ventilation systems, the unusual wiring that connected nothing to anything but had been built for something. And then he saw it. It wasn't the devices themselves, it was where they were placed. Each locker and bag formed a curve, an arc across the outer platforms and maintenance levels of the station. When mapped, it aligned not with foot traffic, but with the underground vent shafts of the central HVAC. They hadn't been targeting people at random, They were testing the station's airflow. He stood quickly, startling Titan, who rose at once. "We're looking in the wrong places," he muttered. They weren't trying to create panic in one place. They were testing spread, distribution radius. By noon, Griggs had confirmed the design. The arc across platforms combined with the high-volume fan systems under the concourse would have allowed for a cascading release. Each bag only needed a microdose to be released near the vent intake. From there, the ventilation would do the rest, pushing the neurocompounds through ticket booths, restrooms, waiting lounges, and food courts. Slow, invisible, perfect. But there was still one thing missing: the trigger. And Titan hadn't relaxed. It came in the form of a tip, an anonymous message routed through a city commuter feedback site. The subject line was simple: "You missed the last one. Lower platforms, tracks M12, M14. Security footage had already been wiped for that sector, likely intentional. But Titan didn't need video. Griggs led the dog down into the maintenance tunnels once again, following the service stairs through dim, crumbling corridors. The air grew damp and heavy. These platforms had been closed for renovations for nearly a year. No trains, no commuters, but they were accessible and forgotten. Perfect for something no one was meant to find. Titan paused near a rusted maintenance locker, then turned sharply toward a wall panel beneath the old track M13 sign. His nose pressed against a faint groove in the stone, a narrow latch. Griggs reached out and pulled. Behind the panel was a hollow just large enough for a backpack. Inside, another dispersal device, and something else. A journal. Unlike the other recovered notes, this one was filled with scrawled handwriting. Test sites complete. 4 cities done. The 5th was always meant to be local. Eyes too sharp to see us here. Let the dogs find us. They always know even when the sensors don't. Let them chase this last ember before the spark spreads. A date was scribbled at the bottom. That day and a time. 5:29 p.m. Griggs checked his watch. 4:03 p.m. They weren't done. He raced back to the command floor, Titan right at his side. Within minutes, Agent Hensley was on the phone with Homeland Headquarters. All lower platforms were sealed, maintenance entrances locked down, HERVAC systems suspended temporarily. But Titan wasn't done. As Griggs reviewed the journal once more, the dog let out a short, sudden bark, not urgent, but decisive. He was facing the commuter rail schedule board, and that's when Griggs saw it. The train scheduled for 5:30 p.m., a test run of a new express line, was set to pass through the abandoned lower tunnel before rejoining the main line toward the suburbs. That was the plan, a moving dispersal, set to release along the train's route, where sealed compartments would funnel the compound out during acceleration. Passengers would have started feeling the symptoms 2 stops in: nausea, dizziness, panic. Emergency services overwhelmed by confusion. By the time responders figured out what had happened, the train would be empty, clean, silent. The attack blamed on a mechanical malfunction or onboard illness, but not this time. The train was stopped before departure. The final dispersal unit recovered from the undercarriage of the rear car, wired into the ventilation shaft, ready to release its contents at speed. Griggs watched as the hazmat team removed it from the track. Titan sat beside him, silent, watching, still. 2 days later, at a press conference, the transit commissioner addressed the city. This was not just a threat averted. It was a lesson. About listening to what doesn't show up on screens. About trusting instinct, human and animal alike. One dog's refusal to ignore what felt wrong saved this city from something it may not have even recognized as an attack. Titan stood beside Griggs in the back of the room, out of the spotlight. But that was how he liked it. The amber-eyed Malinois never sought attention. He only watched, quietly, constantly. That night, Griggs sat in the quiet of his apartment, the city lights glimmering beyond the window. Titan lay on the floor, one eye half open, ears still twitching at the faintest sound. Griggs held the journal in his hand. Every page had been scanned, logged, and photographed. But one thing kept echoing in his mind. Let the dogs find us. They always know. It hadn't been written with contempt. It had been written with respect. Whoever planned this knew about dogs like Titan, knew that there were instincts no compound could hide from, no algorithm could mimic, no signal could jam. The next morning, Griggs stood in front of a classroom at the Transit Security Academy. Behind him, a screen showed surveillance footage of Titan during the initial discovery of the bag at Track 9B. In your careers, he said to the group of fresh recruits, you still learn to rely on equipment, on training, on procedures. But there will be moments where the only thing that keeps a station safe is one thing. He looked down at Titan, lying at his feet. Trust. In the weeks that followed, Homeland Security and the Department of Transportation began developing a new initiative, Project Instinct, a multi-agency program to study and integrate K9 behavioral anomalies into emerging threat response systems. Titan's reactions, captured on multiple angles and analyzed by behavioral scientists, became the foundation of a new understanding that not all detection comes from what can be quantified. Sometimes it comes from partnership, from bond, from something wordless, something sensed. And so a Belgian Malinois named Titan walked the station halls each morning, not just as a dog with a job, but as a silent guardian, a partner, a hero in fur. And every time he passed that bench near Track 9B, he paused, just for a second, because even heroes remember where their stories begin. If this story gave you chills, wait till you see what's coming next. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss another real-life moment where a dog changes everything. And give this video a like if you believe animals have instincts we should always trust.